For the first time in its 61-year history, the European Union's top job will be held by a woman. EU lawmakers have narrowly endorsed the long-serving German minister, Ursula von der Leyen, as the European Commission's new president. She's promised ambitious social, environmental and immigration reforms. But as Sarah Morice reports, the new president isn't without controversy.
This is the woman who'll shape the future of Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, the current German defence minister, was a surprise last-minute candidate for the job. To secure the presidency, she needed the majority of the European Parliament to back her, and they have, but only just. 383 votes in favour and 327 against.
I feel so honoured and I'm overwhelmed, and I thank you for the trust you placed in me. The trust you placed in me is confidence you placed in Europe. Your confidence in a united and a strong Europe, from east to west, from south to north.
Von der Leyen is a centre-right politician, but also a virtually federalist, and has said she'd like to see a United States of Europe. But in a bid to attract votes from the divided parliament, her policy pledges were designed to appeal to nationalists, federalists and environmentalists alike. She says she'd back another delay on Brexit, admits migration is a divisive challenge for Europe and has lofty climate ambitions.
I want Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050.
But von der Leyen's appointment is controversial. EU leaders rejected the original nominees and settled on what's widely seen as a Franco-German compromise. It puts Frenchwoman Christine Lagarde in charge of the European Central Bank and gives the Commission to von der Leyen, a long-time ally of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And there are plenty within the European Parliament who don't think von der Leyen is up to the challenge.
She did never do a good job in Germany as Ministry for the Families, as Minister for Labour and Social Affairs, and as Minister of Defence. Why should I expect that she will do a good job here as Commission as President?
Politically, von der Leyen's not expected to be all that different from her predecessor, Jean-Claude Juncker. That's something likely to frustrate the new wave of populist politicians elected to the Parliament in May. And with just a paper-thin majority securing her presidency, wielding power over the divided MPs may prove difficult. Sarah Morice, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on this now with Daniel Gros in Brussels. He's the director of the Centre for European Policy Studies, which is a think tank looking at European affairs. Welcome to Money Talks, Daniel. Ursula von der Leyen's victory is clearly an historic moment for the European Union, the first woman in the top job. But tell us more about what's on her agenda.
I think she has a very full agenda. She has promised almost everything to everybody, and it's quite certain that she cannot keep all her promises. So all she can really do is to try. And in order to succeed, she doesn't really have to count on the European Parliament, but much more on European leaders, because only they can deliver what Ursula von der Leyen wants. And I think that will be her toughest job.
Now, just remind us about the role of European Commission President. Exactly what powers will she have, and what's essentially her role in the European Union?
She has very little personal powers. She is not like the President of the United States, who can just sign things, order troops, impose tariffs. First of all, she has to convince all her fellow commissioners. There's one commissioner per country. And then, when she has an idea and she has convinced her colleagues, she must convince the heads of state of all the member countries of the European Union. And that has always proven to be very difficult. Outside a crisis, the Commission President cannot achieve a lot, but she can certainly try to nudge things along in the right direction.
OK, now can you identify for us what would be some of her main challenges as she undertakes her term as President?
When she starts, probably the economy will not be her main issue. The euro crisis is behind us, the European economy is expanding, perhaps a bit slower than expected. But the key issues are really two things. One is how to deal with China and the US, with the US asking Europe to take its side. And that is very difficult for Europe because it has very strong commercial interests in China. And the second challenge is internal, namely how to ensure that the rule of law is applied all over the European Union and in all member states. That's a very delicate task, which the previous Commission didn't really do very well. And I think this will be her most difficult challenge ahead.
Yes, I want to come to the internal challenge in a moment, but let's look at the US issue here, because obviously Donald Trump is threatening to impose tariffs on many EU exports, including its lucrative car industry. Do you think Ursula von der Leyen will be the woman to stand up to Donald Trump?
I think she will not do anything different from what any Commission president would have to do. She will say, in trade terms, we are as big as you are. And if you impose tariffs, we'll do the same thing on your goods. And there might be some tariff war across the Atlantic with some escalation here and there. But we have seen from Donald Trump, in the end, he usually gives in if you give him a symbolic victory. And that will be her key task. She has to find what symbolic victory can she give Donald Trump to preserve basically good trade relations with the United States.
Now, let's look at the internal challenge you mentioned. We know that EU members like Italy and Hungary are openly challenging the bloc's authority over their affairs. How will Ursula von der Leyen deal with those issues?
It's actually a bit more subtle than this, if I may say, because Hungary and Italy and also Poland, they're politicians who challenge the EU on Twitter, on Facebook, in the public. But then the governments, when real decisions are being taken in Brussels, they're usually quite reasonable and they follow the EU rule book. So what Ursula von der Leyen has to avoid is this public spat. Brussels cannot tell us what we want to do. But just to make sure that the court systems remain independent, that media freedom is guaranteed, these are the things she has to do, not through big speeches, but through concrete actions, maybe sometimes also action behind the scenes. And that is her main task now.
And what about Brexit? It's probably going to be one of her more immediate headaches that she'll have to deal with. What's her position on the UK's withdrawal from the EU?
I think her position is the same as everybody in Brussels. We don't know what to do. It's up to the UK to decide. We, Brussels, have made an offer which we think is fair to the United Kingdom. If they don't want to take it, that's their problem. There's not much we, Brussels, can do. If they want to have more time in the UK to think about it, maybe that can be granted. But otherwise, it's up to the new probable Prime Minister Johnson to decide, does he want to leave the EU with the agreement which has been offered, or does he want to leave without? OK, we'll see what happens. Daniel Gros in Brussels, thank you again for your time.